Let us see which domain reigns supreme. What's up, guys? I'm Hunter here, and here we are to do a breakdown and analysis to determine which domain is better. The Unlimited Void of Gojo Satoru, or Ryomen Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. Now, obviously, we know who is the more powerful of the two combatants. One of them lost, and it was Gojo Satoru. So obviously we know who is overall the better combatant. But I want to do like a little mini-series going down over each of their individual stats and talking about them in comparison to each other. And I feel like the first one is the one that they are mostly hotly still talked about to this day, which would be their respective domain expansions. The Ryoki Tenkais, if you will. So let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into it. Editing me, I must summon you to this plane of reality to help me bear witness to the bare flesh of the ones who are free, to the ones who have left it all behind in their overwhelming intensity. Editing me, ready, 3, 2, 1, go. What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here. Fun fact, I do happen to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. And another fun fact. See that? You see that? That's a little embarrassing right there, ain't it? You know what that is? That's Gojo's domain. Getting shattered by Malevolent Shrine. So I guess the answer is clear immediately. Like, it's gotta be Malevolent Shrine. It clearly, okay, obviously, you know, I'm messing around a little bit. Let's actually hop into a discussion to determine on every single level which domain is better. I'm going to go through each individual category and give each character a respective point and each domain a respective point to determine which one is better. Obviously, I think it's pretty clear to argue that Sukuna is a clear domain user, but their applications, how they're used, let's actually go into that and let's talk about which one is better. So the first thing I want to actually talk about is not even this, not the effects of the domain, not their abilities, not the curse techniques imbued in them, not what they allow their users to do inside of them, none of that. The first thing I actually want to talk about is so simple as this. How handy are these two domains? Let's talk about how you activate both of these domains. How are domains activated, quite typically? Well, obviously, it's with these bad boys right here, hand signs. Every single domain we've seen, whether it be, well, actually, with one exception, I think the only, and I think Hanami was about to activate a domain without hand signs, but Dagon is about the only character in the entire series who we see go to activate a domain without hand signs. Even Mahito needs to morph parts of his body into hands in order to activate a domain expansion. Whether it be Hakari Kinji, whether it be, I was about to say Dagon, but no, not Dagon. Whether it be Naoya, whether it be Gojo Satoru or Ryomen Sukuna, the step that leads into domains all begins here. Begins with the hands. But of course, how am I going to rate these two? What would this be a point for in terms of domain activation? Well, I do think this genuinely matters. And I think I do have to open up giving the first point to Unlimited Void and by proxy Gojo Satoru because of this. That's how you activate his domain. With one hand. Now, we don't know if the domain is ambidextrous. Specifically? What, like in the Pacific Ocean? Specifically, we always see him activate with the right hand, because notably Gojo Satoru does not lose an arm to see if he can use it with his left until after domains are essentially banned from the matchup, and essentially every single time we see him use it with the right. But with that being the case, the fact that his domain is able to be activated by one hand is actually very, very useful, despite how stupid that sounds. Because Ryomen Sukuna does need two hands to activate it. And it's such a simple thing, but it goes a long way. So in a scenario like this, that is all the way back in chapter 223, Sukuna couldn't open domain here. He definitely has other domain counters. He likely has an understanding, he's seen it before, of simple domain. If he knows what that does, he can use it. If he has domain, well, we know he has domain amplification, he can activate that on a whim, though apparently we'll get into that and see how effective that is against both of these domains in a bit. He has other answers to it, but specifically the main answer to another domain that he would typically have in domain expansion is not available to him here because his hand is gone. And that is very, very important, because in a scenario where you lop off Gojo Satoru's left arm, he still can do this. He can still immediately throw up the domain. And considering it's Gojo Satoru, he may be able to just with the left hand too. The hand signs are essentially the same. They're just mirrored based on whichever hand you're using. So I have to give the first point to Unlimited Void, and not Malevolent Shrine, mainly because the activation is so streamlined, in the sense that you only have to use one hand. So if one hand is encumbered, if the other hand is chopped off, vaporized, any sort of thing like that, Gojo Satoru will be able to activate his domain while Ryomen Sukuna couldn't. This matters mainly just because, like, it's quicker and easier and safer to do this than it is to form the entire, like, I don't even think I can, like, what? I think it's something like, no, I'm trying to, like, actually perform the Malevolent Shrine hand sign, and I literally can't, I don't think my hands are, like, flexible. Like, I think it's like, I can't. Like, I physically cannot do this. Obviously, Ryomen Sukuna, he has enough reaction speed, typically, in time with Gojo, that he can throw it up at the exact same time. Whether they're pump faking or not pump faking, they can immediately go for the same thing. But in a specific case where we know, where battles can open up, where someone can just lose a whole hand, or we see later in the battle when Gojo Satoru loses his... Gojo Satoru? Lord. Where Gojo Satoru loses his whole hand, having a one-hand easy activation domain is very, very useful. And I'm going to have to give the first point to Unlimited Void and Gojo Satoru for the 1.1 hand activation of Unlimited Void. And don't worry, Sukuna fans. It's going to be one of the few points that Gojo wins. Or is it? We'll see about that. So, 1 point to Satoru Gojo. I'm just marking that down so it's nice and clear to me. My notes app autocorrected to Gino, not Gojo. What does it autocorrect Sukuna to? It just doesn't autocorrect Sukuna. So, right now, Gojo has 1 point in terms of domains. Let's leap into the next major thing with the domain. The most prevalent thing of it, and the thing that I'm going to have to immediately give Sukuna a point for, it was what I showed y'all earlier. Let's take it back to where it all began. Not this, not that, not any of this. This right here. See that? That's a barrier. That's a barrier. Now, what do barriers do? If you've forgotten, the reason barriers are usually so good and so juicy and so scrumdiddlyumptious is that they kind of don't have to follow the rules of conventional space. They essentially create a tiny little pocket dimension, which allows for weird things, like Dagon's domain containing an entire island inside of it, when on the outside, it's not even big enough to, like, consume the entire train station. Where you have, like, Jogo containing an entire mountain inside of his domain, the coffin of the Iron Mountain, but you see that, at least in the anime, I'm not sure if they showed in the manga, I think they may show in the manga, but essentially his domain is very compact and like very much over a river. You have an unlimited void contained within Gojo Satoru's domain, but this is the size of it. Maybe a little bit bigger than like 2 cars stacked on top of each other. But ultimately, there is a barrier. A barrier. A closed barrier. Do you know what Ryomen Sukuna's domain does not have? A closed barrier. It is an open barrier domain. Now, I do believe open barrier is the proper term. For the longest time, me and the entire rest of the fandom called it barrierless domains because apparently that's how the official, well, not the official, the unofficial fan translations called it for the longest time. And thusly, me, everyone else, you can even go back to my old reviews, I called it barrierless this, barrierless that, but apparently it's an open barrier domain. Essentially, there are no constrictions, no confinements due to a binding vow instituted by Sukuna. And thusly, his Malevolent Shrine does not have the pocket dimension effect. Now, admittedly, this does have its downsides to it. The natural byproduct of not having the pocket dimension effect and the barrier effect in of itself means that you can escape Malevolent Shrine. You can escape it, which is typically something that you cannot do in other domains unless you somehow shatter it from the inside. But typically, the insides of domains are very, very strong. And with that being the case, if you're going domain or fighting someone with a domain while you don't have a domain, you're kind of just stuck there. Especially considering the bounds of the domain are much larger inside the domain shell itself than the domain shell may apply. You can't just like run to some presumed edge and start punching at it. Megami had to like weirdly conceive a way around the barrier and determine where it was. He created a hole in the ocean that Dagon made. Somehow. The edge, like, it's not like Megami could have taken 2 steps back and he would have stepped outside the domain barrier. No, the ocean probably kept going. So, the separate spaces is typically a perk, but very specifically, within the case of Ryomen Sukuna's, the flexibility and range of Malevolent Shrine allows it a very specific edge against something like this. Against a barrier domain. because it allows for the overlapping of not just the internal space of the domain, and no matter how large it is, but also the external space around a domain. And in case of someone who isn't using a domain, it's just 200 meters, which is still very, very good. 200 meters is a massive distance to cover. And honestly, most characters, if they're being torn to ribbons inside of something that literally adapts to their durability, they're most likely not going to survive that. But of course, that's domain effects. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But the fact that Gojo Satoru's domain still has a barrier is a massive weakness. A massive weakness that's going to have to make me give a point to Ryomen Sukuna, especially since it isn't just that. Because one may argue, well, okay, very specifically in a domain battle with a open barrier domain versus a closed barrier domain, this is a downside. But what in the case of where it actually be better to have the separate pocket space? Sure, this is nice against Gojo Satoru specifically because it allows Ryomen Sukuna to shut down his technique, close off Unlimited Void, and start attacking from the outside, but the pocket dimension effect of Unlimited Void would be fantastic against most other characters because it means they wouldn't be able to escape, and most characters outside, or even in the verse, not to talk of cross-verse, don't necessarily have a domain to counter domain Gojo with, if they have any sort of technique even remotely similar to that at all. So why wouldn't you just give both points? Because they both have their very specific niches. It's because Malevolent Shrine was customized that way. As Ryomen Sukuna does confirm within chapter 230, hey broski, let me level with you real quick. I make it open barriered, but guess what, bucko? Next time I'll close the domain with a barrier. You'll have nowhere to run. So Malevolent Shrine is customizable. Customizable to an insane degree, meaning that it can also become a closed barrier domain. Now, we don't know the size of the domain shell. Maybe it can also be upwards to the 200 meters that Sukuna can do when it is an open barrier domain. Though admittedly, it's explained when the domain first appears that it's kind of like a binding vow thing, that the reason it can't be 200 meters is because it allows the opportunity to escape. So maybe it would be the size of a traditional domain, but still, you can have the pocket dimension effect, or you can have the overlapping space effect. Who knows? Considering how skilled Sukuna is with domains, you may have both if he's really feeling fancy about it, but that would be super specific and probably a waste of cursed energy. So I'm going to have to give a hefty little point to Ryomen Sukuna for having the ability to override domains with his barrierless aspect of the domain, which overlaps in real space and the false space that is set up by domains, yet still have the ability to close the domain himself. Gojo Satoru in Unlimited Void never shows barrierless domain potential. What in the world did I just say? Gojo Satoru's domain never, and I mean never, throughout his entire encounter, his 13 chapter long battle with Sukuna, never actually shows the potential to open the barrier of his domain. He just never does. Notably, the solution he comes up for it, it's another point that's going to actually have to go towards Sukuna just because of how the customization works. But with that being the case, the solution that Gojo Satoru comes up with for Unlimited Void shows that he just does not have the skill or the ability or the capability to do what Sukuna does. In the sense that he can't make it an open barrier domain. Meaning, on a customizable front, Unlimited Void is just weaker. Sure, the byproduct solution he comes up with the tiny domain, which he institutes in a way to counteract the effects of the almighty power of the open barrier Malevolent Shrine, is good, but it's very clearly established that if Gojo and Sukuna were to simply chat up within their respective domains, or maybe Sukuna was just to run around and try to avoid Gojo, or domain amp through everything so Gojo can't use blue on him or anything like that, and just scurry around, Sukuna would clearly just be able to win, as this domain is still very, very breakable, even though it is more durable. Meanwhile, the only way for Gojo to break Sukuna's domain is by dealing extensive damage to him, which is more a testament to Gojo's ability as a sorcerer, rather than Sukuna's inability to use a domain or alter his domain in any way, shape, or form. But even then, I'm going to give another point to Sukuna in terms of Malevolent Shrine and its customizability, because of how it is so easily customizable. Notice how Ryomen Sukuna is able to manipulate the effects, the sure hit, and everything of his domain on the fly. Not only does he naturally have the open barrier effect, not only does he reveal that he can immediately close and turn off the open barrier effect whenever he feels like it, but also he's able to manipulate and redirect the force and the output of his abilities on the fly. With, once again, I gave points to Gojo for this earlier, a singular hand sign. With simply this motion, he's able to override and empower the outside of his attacks, the open barrier space of the domain, rather than the effects inside, in order to, I'll just quote the chapter here, the binding valve for negating malevolent shrines can't miss command inside Gojo's domain further increased the power outside the domain, and Sukuna survived Unlimited Void by touching Gojo. Once again, Satoru Gojo's domain crumbled. So, that's a pretty bad thing. Just in terms of customizability, Malevolent Shrine has just shown way more. You can do way more with it. Of course, this comes to more a skill, I hate to say it, but it is kind of just a skill issue between the two sorcerers. It's clear that Sukuna just knows more, but once again, if I'm talking about the Shrine, and I'm talking about Unlimited Void, two things that may never appear ever again in the entire series, I'm going to compare their main utilizations against each other, considering every previous use is pretty dominant and they kind of just steamroll. So allow us to review why Gojo Satoru, the strongest sorcerer of the modern day, even in domains, falls short to Ryomen Sukuna. Gojo Satoru has 3 points while Ryomen Sukuna has 4. For Gojo Satoru's main points, 1, he succeeds massively in the sense that his domain is simply one-handed. The fact that he has that is very, very, very good in comparison to the two-handed nature of Sukuna's domain. You chop Sukuna's hand off, he can't activate domain. You chop Gojo's hand off, as long as it's his right hand, and if he's ambidextrous, which he most likely is because it's Gojo Satoru, bada bing, bada boom, you still have domain. There's a point for that. The lethality edge is another edge that Sukuna's does not have over Unlimited Void, because Sukuna is able to be immediately brain damaged by Unlimited Void after being exposed for less than 10 seconds. Meanwhile, Gojo Satoru, who presumably spent a lot more time in the Malevolent Shrine, was not brain damaged or took any serious lethal damage. He was able to RCT right through it, meaning if you have good enough regen, you can survive Malevolent Shrine much longer than you can survive Unlimited Void. And of course, the third and final point I have to give Gojo Satoru is the soul damage perk, which Malevolent Shrine simply seems to lack in spite of Sukuna's dual soul nature, based on the fact that Megami Soul took the damage, and it was a separate soul inside Sukuna, yet all the energy was still, well, I guess all the energy is kind of weird, but all the curse energy was still directly redirected into Megami's soul, meaning that it does target multiple souls inside the domain, not just the one mainly controlling the body, meaning that it is overall more lethal to the soul than Malevolent Shrine is. But Malevolent Shrine still has to get those 4 points. It still has to be superior for the fact that, 1, it's an open barrier domain, which Unlimited Void just never shows the potential for, meaning it is consistently and ever predatory to non-open barrier domains, to the point where it's kind of just unfair on numerous levels, for the sense that anyone who goes domain with them is going to have to deal with the fact that their domain is pretty much always under assault, no matter how small the domain is made to add extra durability. That's point 1. Number 2, the customization, completely different. The ability to go open barriered or close barriered on a whim is still way too good, way too crazy to just ignore, and something that Unlimited Void also just does not have access to. Number 3, domain amplification inside the domain is just way too good a perk to not deal with. The fact that he can do this while Gojo can't do that, absolutely wild. Boogoo bonkers. You're gonna have to give Sukuna a point for that. And finally, the lack of weakness. Since that this is a thing, you can ignore Unlimited Void as long as you are in contact with Gojo Satoru. Meanwhile, there's no way to enact that same kind of effect on Malevolent Shrine. I have to give Malevolent Shrine the edge as the superior domain. And in this assessment of Gojo versus Sukuna, Sukuna truly also is the strongest. However, that's what I think. Please know what you guys think in the comment section down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave expansion domain in the comment section down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to hit that little notification bell so you do not miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below where you can support me for as low as $1 a month to get things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also now become a member to the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks include the live reaction to the very next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen. Now, thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Dago the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members, Recliner Plays, Red Wolf 4765, Greyhound, and Akid's Void. And I'd like to give another thank you to our $5 patrons, Victor, Sean, Midnight Gemlord, Kevin, Demix LND, and Igneal. And I'd like to give a chunky thank you to our $7 member, Autumn's Morning Lazo. And I'd like to give another chunka thank you to our $10 patrons, Robbie Uchiha, Joaquin, Idemokai, and China Doll 09. I'd like to give a hefty thank you to our $25 member, Alex Ice Rose. I'd like to give another giga gargantuan thank you to our $25 patron, Calvin Elder.